Okay, so recently I've been asked by quite a few people about how I tie micro feather game changers. To fly, I tie quite a bit of. I really enjoy tying them and fishing them. So I'm going to go ahead and try to tie one up for you guys tonight. A couple ways we can do this tonight. We're going to do a brush head feather game changer. I just feel like these guys have a little bit more water push. You can also do a fully feathered version, feathers all the way to the head. A little bit more of a finesse pattern. They both swim great. I just think that these guys have a little bit more water push. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what you need, and then I'm going to tie one up. And to keep the video short, I'm going to fast forward the middle section. It's pretty repetitive. All we're trying to do is get a taper. So I'll explain that as we go. I'll stop at a few points in the video and explain a few things, but yeah, we're going to give it a shot. Quick disclaimer, my first video ever. I have no idea what I'm doing with my camera, and I am 100% YouTube taught. So if you learn any bad habits, blame YouTube. Okay, let's try it. First thing you guys are going to need, the Flymen articulated microspines. Comes in a pack with the tail shanks, the 6mm spines, and 8mm spines. Then you will need a wide gape, heavy wire, short shank hook. I happen to like these Attitude Extras by Partridge, but the I believe it's the SA280 from Arex in size 4, the new minnow hook. That one's great, and it looks like Firehole will be coming out with some newer hooks that kind of match that description as well. And then to connect it, articulating wire of some kind. I like this Senyo's Intruder wire because it's small. If it was a bigger fly, I'd be using beadalon or something, but this is small and it works well for this. For flash, I like to put a little bit of flash in the tail, a little bit of Flashabou. For filler, which is also some flash, I use Cactus Chenille, and I use Palmer Chenille. And most people have these items around, so I'm going to tie it like that. I do also make custom brushes, but since most people don't have a brush making table, I figured I'd do it this way. That way everybody can just jump in and tie. Also, to finish this off, this is one of those little brushes that I was talking about. It's a little custom brush. I believe this is EP fiber. I just sprinkled in some gold ice dub for some flash in the head. And what I like to do also is finish these off with some Pec Fins and some jungle cock for eyes, or you can use tab eyes. But this really, I enjoy doing this. Unnecessary steps, but I like just to add it. It looks pretty good. For tail, I stick with Marabou for the simple fact that I can tear it off after the fact to get that tail proportion right. But you can use Palmer Schlappen, or just some feathers off a hen cape tied to the tail. And so there's a bunch of different ways you can do a tail. The most important thing is going to be your hen saddle. I like using these Hebert Minor or Whiting Red Label hen saddles. They just have the really perfect size feathers for this kind of fly. At the top of the saddle here, we have the narrow feathers that we're going to use at the tail section. And as we work our way down, you can see that the feathers get wider, and that's what gives us our built-in taper. So at each shank, we use a set of feathers, starting at the tail, that are narrow, and then we work our way down the saddle for each subsequent shank, and work our way up using a little bit wider feather. And a quick tip, this really kind of helps out. I like to prep my feathers first. So there's my tail, and you can see that each subsequent feather set is a little bit wider than the one before it. So that just kind of helps out. I like to keep them in that material holder. Makes things go pretty quick. Okay, so first things first, we're going to put in a 6mm tail shank. That's the shank with this little 90-degree bend on it. So we're just going to lock it in the vise. And for thread, using 70 denier GS or UTC. I do use GSP, but it's not necessary. So what I like to do here is add a little flash in the tail. So I'll take some Flashabou that I folded over a few times. I'll just tie it in right on top. Couple turns in there. Then I'll get my Marabou. I tend to like these little stringy tips. So we'll get that, set it right on top of the shank, tie that guy down, get kind of close to where you think your tail is going to be. Couple wraps, hold it in place, check the length. That looks pretty good. Then we'll kind of just tie this off. Get rid of the stems. Then we'll clean up all these little fibers down here. Then for my tail, the Flashabou I like to cut just a little bit longer than my tail. And we will start adding our hen saddle feathers. So we're going to take the two that we prepared, two narrow feathers from the top of the saddle, and we're going to prep them like we would a soft hackle. So we're just going to line up the tips and pull these fibers back. So you have a nice little triangle to tie in right there. Put those guys on top of the shank. Just tie those guys in. Okay, now this is the basis for the entire fly. So what we do is we take our feathers, preen the fibers back, and we're going to palmer forward. So this is basically the entire fly. It's just doing this over and over again until we get our desired length. And take a couple wraps of those guys. Okay, and then once we get those in place, we're going to go ahead and trap our stem in place. Cut those guys off. Then whip finish. And don't worry too much if you get some fibers hanging out the front and they get a little messy. We can fix all that. Normally when I'm tying these, I'll be putting a drop of head cement right on the thread right there. But for demonstration purposes, I'm not going to do that. And if you get any fibers or anything stuck in the eyes, you just can take your bodkin here and run it down. Clears it right out. So another key point, before you take this shank out of the vise, you're going to want to put in your next spine or shank. So now we're going to move to the 6mm spines, and these are really small and they're kind of finicky. So what I like to do is I take my bodkin and just kind of open them up a little bit. Then I get it started. You can either pull them into place like that, or you can put your bodkin in and give it a good little yank. It'll drop right into place. So now that we have that put together, go ahead and move that 6mm spine into the vise. Clamp it down. Now we get a little bit more interesting. So we'll start a thread base. And this is where we start our filler. So we'll take some of our chenille And I like to pull some of these fibers off the core. And trap that down. Take your thread all the way to the back of the shank and then work your way back up. And then here, 2 wraps of this cactus chenille, and we're going to try to preen all the fibers back. I mean, that's easier said than done, but not a lot of real estate on these little spines, so preen them back, 2 good wraps, and then tie it off. And this gives us our support for our feathers so they don't collapse once they're wet. And as it's swimming, this actually helps with the swimming action and keeps it holding its profile underwater. So now I'm just kind of pushing these fibers back, creating a little thread base, a little ramp for our hen feathers. Then we get our next set, which are 2 hen feathers that are a little bit wider than what we use for the tail. And same procedure. Prep the tips. Tie it right in on top. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but I like to put a couple wraps behind it and then in front of it, and then cut the tips off. I just feel like it locks it in a little better. And then the same thing, we're just going to preen this and palmer forward. Just kind of watch the space so you don't crowd the eye too much. Kind of hard to do since these are so small, but the more room you give yourself, the easier it is to work with. So now that we have it down there, trap the stems, plural. And we'll get rid of them. Add a little whip finish here. One more. Okay, and now to keep this video short, I'm going to fast forward progress until we get to the larger shanks. So we just did a tail shank and 1 6mm shank, and then we're going to do 3 more of the 6mm, but each time we're going to do 2 wraps of the cactus chenille, and then we're going to get 2 feathers that are a little bit larger than what we used for the shank prior. So it's pretty boring and pretty repetitive, so I'll fast forward the next 3, and then when we get to the 8mm, I will stop the video and we'll go ahead and show you how I do that one. Okay, so now we're at the 8mm shank. This one's a little bit longer, but it's the same basic procedure. Open it up, pop that guy in. So now we have our tail shank 4 6mm and the 8mm we just put on. So we'll go ahead and put that in the vise. Okay, same thing, except now we're going to add a little bit more chenille than we did before. So the other 4 shanks, we had 2 wraps of chenille. Now we're going to go ahead and put 4. And I don't know if it matters or not. I kind of just count it in my head. So it's 4 or 5. Same thing with the shanks before, 2 or 3. But basically, you're just trapping this core down. You're going to put some touching turns of the chenille down, and you want the fibers to try to stand straight up if you can. So pull them back, wrap it tight. That's 1, 2, 3, let's go 4. 4. Okay. So really the same procedure. And then we kind of just build a little ramp, push these fibers back with a thread. Just use thread pressure. See, they're kind of standing up and they're kind of bunched in the back. That's what we want. Bring your thread back towards the eye. Then we'll take 2 feathers off the pelt. Again, tie these in by the tip. And just full disclosure, I typically use GSP thread. It just doesn't build bulk as quick. So I can see here with my UTC, it's building a little bit more bulk than I would like, but it's still completely workable. I just like to be able to put a lot of pressure on the thread and avoid the buildup, but not everybody has GSP. Not everybody likes it. It is kind of a pain. So I figured I would just do it with what I think most everybody has at the house. Okay, take this guy, we're gonna trap those fibers down. Get rid of the stems. We'll cord up our thread here and give it a nice little whip finish. Ooh. Okay. So here's where it gets a little bit more interesting when we add the hook. We're going to clean out the eye here. And then what I like to do is just kind of give it a quick little brush. Any kind of trap fibers. Get those out of there. You can kind of see that it's tough to see on the video because of the angle, but we're building a little taper here. So I don't know if you can see that very well from the angle, but it's there. Okay. Okay, so for the time being, we've got our tail done. We have tail shank, and we have 4 6mm spines. So we're done with the tail for now, so we'll pop that out of the vise, set it off to the side, and put in our hook. Okay, so we'll go ahead and lay down a thread base. I like to run it down the bend a little bit because what we're trying to do is when we form the loop with our articulating wire, we want to line this spine up directly in line with the shank. That way it's not too high and it's not too low. So we're trying to get it right in line with the shank. So by wrapping down the bend a little bit, that gives us an opportunity to do that. So we'll take our intruder wire, loosely kind of just gather it up. And what I like to do is put it right on top of the shank, but I cheat it towards me a little bit. That way I can double the wire back and lay it parallel right next to the other part of the wire, the other leg of the wire, once I'm done with the loop portion. So we'll go ahead and put our tail on. Kind of gather that up again with some loose wraps. Check our loop size. I like to keep it pretty small. Don't break on me now, thread. I can see it fraying a little bit. Alright. So then I kind of just loosely gather it up. Cut this other wire leg off with the flush cutters. Then we're going to go ahead and just cover this up with thread. That's another benefit of GSP, although I feel like if I look at it sideways that breaks too, but put a little bit more torque on it without breaking it. Okay. Now we have our thread base down. We're going to take our cactus chenille again, pull some fibers, expose the core, tie it in, and we're going to make what I call a little chenille ball right at the back next to the loop. And if this wasn't a demo changer, I would definitely be gooping up the thread here with head cement or super glue. I typically don't fold the wire back on itself on this small of fly because all the pressure's on this front hook. There's no tail hook, no stinger hook, so I don't feel like there's any pressure on there, so I don't see any need to double that wire back. On larger ones where I have a stinger hook in the back, I will double it up. Okay, so we're going to do 4 to 5 wraps right on top of each other basically for this chenille. 4, 5. Okay, and now this is where the Palmer chenille comes in. We're going to make like a little veil over the top of this chenille ball. So we'll take the Palmer chenille, tie it in, and again it doesn't have to be super clean because you're going to cover all this up anyway. So then we'll take it, and I like to do 4 to 5 wraps of this right on top of each other again. And we're going to make a veil or a little cone shape, as you'll see while I build this up. So that's 1 wrap, 2 wraps, 3, 4, and 5. Take our thread back. Oops. Okay. Pull these fibers back and we'll tie them down. Okay. So at this point, you'll be able to see that we have a little cone right here. And what we've done there is with that cone, it kind of covers up our articulating section. It covers up the connection from the hook to the spines, and that's what we want. So then we take 2 of our largest feathers. So these are ones from the very bottom of the saddle, really big and wide. And if they're really long, I will trim them so that I'm using the wider fibers immediately when I tie it in versus having to do a ton of wraps, a ton of palmering, and using short fibers that'll never get seen anyway. So I'll trim the tip. We're going to palmer up probably to the 3/4 point of the hook here. So you can see these are pretty long fibers, and the goal is to try to pick a set of feathers that are long enough that they will cover up the articulation point there. It makes it look seamless. It's not necessary by any means, but it just kind of looks nice when you finish it, and they extend over the back and cover up that connection. And if these longer fibers start to get trapped a little bit, just take a brush, just kind of comb those little ones out. Okay, now that we're here, we can go ahead and tie this off. Okay, you can see there the fibers were long enough to cover up the connection. Looks pretty smooth. We have a taper going. Just brush that guy out. Okay, now here's the fun part. A little extras we can add in if we so choose. I like to add in pec fins. Again, completely unnecessary, but I like the way it looks. So these are JC feathers from the saddle I have, the cape I have, I mean. So it's jungle cock. Just take a few wraps, tie that in. We'll do the same to the other side here. So we'll get those little guys locked in. So they're going right down the side of the body. Okay. Now we'll trim these off here. And now we're here to finish this off. It's about halfway, so this is going to be a little bit larger head than I normally do, but I make these little brushes and I tie these guys in. And I just do these brush head when I feel like I want one with a little bit more water push. Just it's a little bit more dense, so it moves more water, and I think it gives it a little bit more of a kick. Swims a little bit more than the standard feather ones, but it's all about the situation. So we're going to take a few wraps. We're going to do the same thing, palmer this stuff, preen it back and palmer forward. And you want to do touching wrap because we want this head to be fairly dense. We want it to hold up to that water and not collapse on itself when you strip it. So just touching wraps forward. You will have to comb this out. You will get trap fibers. So we'll get to the eye. Get a little path in there for our thread. Trap it. And we trim this guy off. And we're going to comb it because there's definitely trap fibers in there. Okay, that's pretty good. Gotta watch out for that sharp end of the brush there. I didn't quite cut it flush, but it's okay. We'll just keep an eye on it. Now we'll put in a couple of jungle cock eyes. You can use tab eyes, but what I would definitely recommend is to not apply adhesive eyes unless they're loose. Like, you don't want to put them on and squeeze them together and crush the head. I think it turns into more of a jerk style fly at that point. And it kind of gets rid of the swimming action, so I like to leave the head round and not get it crushed. So as long as the tab eyes or whatever you put on are attached loosely, then I think you're in good shape. And by loosely, I just mean that they're not, you don't squeeze the head together and kind of crush it. Okay, so we've got our jungle cock eyes in there. Trim these out. Give it a whip finish. Comb it out, and we're going to look at it. It looks pretty good, but I do kind of trim it, kind of keep everything nice and neat, symmetrical. But that is a micro feathered game changer. Not too bad. Once you get going, I think you can do these in like 20-30 minutes. You don't want to lose them on the first cast, obviously, but they're fun to tie. They're effective. It's a Blane Chocklett pattern. It's just been adapted down with these micro shanks. So these micro shanks you can do like probably up to 2.5 inches or so, maybe 3. This is about 3 inches. After that, you're going to want to bump up to the larger shanks. Those start at 10 millimeter and go all the way up to 20. But I really like this micro style. I think these are really fishy. And anyway, I wanted to make this video because a couple of years ago I got into fly tying myself and didn't know where to look. Got on Instagram and YouTube, did some research, and everybody has been really cool. I was able to reach out to some great tires, and they were willing to share tips. Even Blane Chocklett himself was giving me tips on changers and stuff. So really appreciate all that, and just figured it was time to give back. So hopefully that helps and you guys learned something. So happy tying, and thanks for watching.